Hi everyone, Miss Barber here with 5.3 day 2. Now we're going to be factoring quadratics like ax squared plus bx plus c. So yesterday we talked about how to divide out a greatest common factor, a GCF, and that was like undoing distribution. Today is going to be similar in that we're undoing the multiplication of two binomials. So here I have two binomials, x plus 3 and x minus 5. And before, we talked about how we distribute them. So you might have called it FOIL or distribute, but you would take the x and you would multiply it by x and minus 5. So you'd get x squared minus 5x. You would do the same thing with 3. So you'd do 3 times x and 3 times minus 5. So you'd have plus 3x minus 15. You would combine your like terms of negative 5x plus 3x. To get x squared minus 2x minus 15. So that's called distribution, multiplication, FOIL. You may have called it a bunch of different things before. We're going to be doing the exact opposite today. We're going to take a trinomial. So trinomials are in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, just like standard form of a quadratic. And we're going to end up with two binomials. So we're undoing that multiplication that we just did in the warm-up. We're going to start with the trinomial, and we want to find two binomials that created it. And then those two binomials, we call them the factors of the trinomial. So those are two factors because they technically divide out the trinomial. They multiply to the trinomial. You can divide the trinomial by the factors. So we're going to be searching for two numbers today. In general, we're always going to be finding two numbers that multiply to AC, or A times C. And when I say AC, I mean this A and this C in my trinomial. And are going to add to B. And again, when I say B, I'm talking about the B in my trinomial. So this is the basic process and how to do that. So to factor a trinomial, step one, and this is really important and one most people forget, you're always going to pull out and divide out the GCF. So no matter what, you're going to scan your trinomial and see, is there a GCF? Looking here at 6x squared minus 39x minus 21, I know that 3 goes into all of these. So I'm going to divide the 3 out. The 3 goes out in front, just like yesterday. And I'm left with 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. Now we're going to need to know what A, B, and C are. So A is in front of x squared, B is in front of x, and C is your constant at the end. We're going to draw an x. This is how we set up and organize our information. On the top of your x is going to be A times C. Well, in this case, A times C is going to be 2 times negative 7, so it's going to be negative 14. The bottom of your x is B, and in this case, B is negative 13. All right, so now we are thinking of two numbers that multiply to negative 14 and add to negative 13. So again, we want two numbers. I'll call them J and K. So I want J times K to equal negative 14, and I want J plus K to equal negative 13. So two numbers that multiply to AC and add to B. So this is where you want to start listing out your factors of negative 14. Well, I know 7 and 2 will multiply to 14, but there's no way 7 and 2 are going to get me to negative 13. But I know 14 and 1 also multiply to 14, and I can figure out a way for them to add to negative 13. So if I say negative 14 times 1, that's going to equal negative 14. And negative 14 plus 1 will equal negative 13. So negative 14 and 1 are going to be my two factors that satisfy those conditions of multiplying to negative 14 and adding to negative 13. If you can't find any two numbers and you've checked all of them, then probably your quadratic is not factorable. So you would just write not factorable and move on. But in this case it is, so we're going to keep going. So now we're going to go back to my x. AC is on the top, so negative 14 is on the top. B is on the bottom, so negative 13 is on the bottom. And I now have my two numbers that multiply to negative 14 and add to negative 13. So I'm going to write them on the bottom of the fraction. I'm going to write 1 on one side, it doesn't matter, and negative 14 on the other. On the top of my fraction goes AX. So this is the generic setup I'll write over here. So generically at the top is A times C. At the bottom is B. And you set it up where you have AX, AX, and then your two factors or your two numbers underneath. So A in this case was 2, so I'm going to put 2x at the top of both these fractions. All right. You have to simplify the fractions, and then you're going to rewrite them as a factor. Well, 2x over 1, that fraction doesn't simplify. It's as simplified as it gets. So that just becomes 2x plus 1. So the denominator becomes the second number in your binomial. 2x divided by 14 simplifies. Hopefully you recognize that 2 goes into both 2 and negative 14. So I leave my x on top, and my negative always needs to stay on the bottom. Even if it's just a 1 on the bottom, it needs to stay. So dividing the top by 2, I'm going to get 1x. Dividing the bottom by 2, I'm going to get negative 7. Well, that fraction becomes x minus 7. So that's the basic process of factoring. And then we can't forget we had that 2 out in front. When we originally, or the 3, sorry. We originally factored out a 3, so that's going to go in the very front. And that's your final answer. We took a trinomial, and we were able to get an answer with two binomials. If you were to redistribute or multiply these out, you would get your original 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. So I know that was a little bit confusing to start, so let's try a few more. My first here in example 1, all of them have an a of 1. So you'll notice in my first term, there's no number in front of x squared. So it makes it a little bit easier, but we still follow the same process. So my a is just 1 in this case. My b in front of my x is 5, and my c is 6. I'm going to draw my x. On the top is a times c. Well, a times c would be 1 times 6, so that's just going to be 6. On the bottom is b, which is my 5. And I'm going to set up my fractions. A is 1, so I can write 1x or just plain old x on top. It doesn't matter. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 6 that add to 5. Well, that's 2 and 3. Order of that doesn't matter. And then you look to see if you can simplify your fractions. You can't because they both have a 1 in the numerator. So x over 2 becomes the factor x plus 2, and x over 3 becomes the factor x plus 3. So then that's just your answer. If you were to redistribute it, you would get x squared plus 5x plus 6. Let's do letter C. So I'm going to draw my x. My a is still 1. My b, there's no coefficient in front of x, so it will be 1. And my c is negative 6. In the top of my fraction is going to be a times c. 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. On the bottom is my b, which is 1. I'm going to write ax on top, which is just 1x or x. I'm going to do two numbers that multiply to negative 6 that add to 1. So think about it. In order for it to add to 1, my factors have to be very close to each other. Well, in this case, 3 and 2 make 6. One of them has to be negative because I have to multiply to a negative number. So it's going to end up being negative 2 and positive 3. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. So x over negative 2 doesn't simplify, so it's just going to become x minus 2. And x over 3 also doesn't simplify, so it becomes x plus 3. And then that's the factored form. We'll try one more when a is 1. So letter E. Again, my a is still 1. My b is the number in front of x, so it's 7, and c is 6. A times c, 1 times 6 is going to be 6 on top. B is 7 on bottom. Setting up my fractions, it's still just going to be 1x. Two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 7. 2 and 3 multiply to 6, but they don't add to 7. But 1 and 6 multiply to 6 and add to 7. So 1 and 6 are going to be my two factors. Again, your fractions are not going to simplify because they have 1 in the numerator. So x over 1 is going to become x plus 1, and x over 6 is going to become x plus 6. And then that's your factored form. If you redistribute, you're going to get x squared plus 7x plus 6. So that's when a is 1. But oftentimes, it's not going to be so friendly, and a won't be 1. So this is where we have to follow all of those steps to a T that are written on the first page. First, you always check to see if there's a GCF when your a isn't 1. I have a 5, a negative 17, and a 6. So there is no GCF here. So I don't have to divide anything out to begin with. So I'm going to start by drawing my x. On the top of your x, you're going to do a times c. 5 times 6 is 30, so that's going to go on top. And on the bottom of your x is going to be b, which is negative 17. Now for my fractions, I do have an a. So I'm going to write 5x or ax at the top of both of my fractions. On the bottom of my fraction, I'm going to write numbers that multiply, two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to negative 17. Well, those two numbers are negative 2 and negative 15. Two negatives are going to multiply to a positive but still add to a negative. My fraction of 5x over negative 2 doesn't simplify at all. However, 5x over negative 15 does. That's the same thing as x over negative 3, dividing the numerator and the denominator by 5. Remember, you want to keep the negative in the denominator. So then these two, 5x over negative 2 becomes 5x minus 2, and x over negative 3 becomes x minus 3. And that is your two binomials that multiply out to 5x squared minus 7x plus 6. All right, let's try letter C. So again, step 1 is to see, do you have a GCF? Number 6, I do. 6, 20, and 16 are all divisible by 2. So I have a GCF this time of 2. So I'm going to divide out 2. And when I do that, I have a 2 out in front. I have to make sure I include that in my final answer. Sometimes people forget that. And I'm left with 3x squared minus 10x plus 8, just dividing out 2. You're only going to work with the a, b, and c that are inside your parentheses. That 2 is just going to show up again at the end when you're done factoring. So draw your x. 3 times 8 goes on top, so that will be 24. And then your b of negative 10 goes on bottom. We still have an a that's not 1. My a is 3, so I'm going to write 3x on the top of both my fractions. And I have to think of two numbers that multiply to 24 that add to negative 10. Well, in this case, it's going to be so two numbers that are going to multiply to 24 and add to negative 10. So you've got to think, well, 24 is 8 and 3, so that doesn't work. You can try 6 and 4, which will work. So one of them is going to be 4, and then one of them is going to be 6, and they both have to be negative in order to add to negative 10 and multiply to positive 24. 3x over negative 4 doesn't simplify, so that will just be your one factor, 3x minus 4. Your other fraction, 3x over negative 6, will simplify to x over negative 2, dividing both by 3. So you'll have x minus 2 as your second factor. Don't forget again about that 2 out in front. That 2 out in front comes down, and we have to write that in the front again for our final answer. Because if I was to distribute and multiply this all out, that's the only way I can get back to my original 6x squared minus 20x plus 16. Let's try one more. Let's try letter F. Letter F, notice we're starting with a negative a. Well, we don't want to start with a negative a, so I'm going to divide all of them by negative 1. They don't have any other GCF, so I'm just choosing my GCF to be negative 1. So then that way my a is positive. We're much more familiar when a is positive. So I'm going to be left with 2w squared plus w minus 3. I'm going to set up my x like always. Negative 6 goes on top because I'm going to do 2 times negative 3. My bottom is 1. There's nothing in front of w, so it's just assumed to be 1. I'm going to have 2w and 2w on the top of my fraction. Two numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add to 1 are going to be 3. Sorry, that's a 3. And a negative 2. 2w over 3 on the left doesn't simplify, so I'm going to be left with 2w minus 3. And on the right, 2w divided by negative 2, that's going to simplify to w over negative 1. Again, you have to keep a negative in the bottom. So then w minus 1 will be my second factor. Also remember, we had this negative 1 out in front. We can't forget that in our final answer. So my final answer is going to be negative 1, or just negative, parenthesis, 2w minus 3, w minus 1. And that's how you factor trinomials, where it's in the form of ax squared